Okay, so now we're going to talk about pre-rhetoric, okay? Recitation, imitation, paraphrase, summary, etc. So first we'll talk about recitation. Now we already did a little bit of that reading aloud. But it also includes reciting something memorized. It can include orally sort of responding to questions or even dramatization. Now a classical school employs all these activities. But first we're going to talk about the recitation of memorized pieces. We do recitation in a classical school every week at the grammar stage. A recitation piece gets assigned on Monday, they put it into their copybooks, they have a week to prepare it, and then they recite it the following Monday. At least that's how it worked for me. We assign poetry, speeches, proverbs, fables, folktales, parables. So one example, one week, a first grader might memorize the fable, The Tortoise and the Hare. It might give you the narrative, out from memory. Another week he might do, "'Tis a lesson you should heed, try again. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Then your courage should appear, for if you will persevere, you will conquer, never fear, try again." I can hear my kids doing this because they all had to memorize this one. So my recitation collection for grades K through 5, it includes things like the Pledge of Allegiance, the St. Francis instrument of your peace prayer, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Wordsworth's Daffodils, the Ten Commandments, Shakespeare's Winter Wind, little bits of Dickens's Christmas Carol, the Star-Spangled Banner, parts of Lincoln's second inaugural, the entire Gettysburg Address. It's not that long. Paul Revere's Ride. It's really not, it's not that long. It doesn't take, actually the kids love memorizing it because it's just so incredibly beautiful. So my list goes on and on and on. And if our kids are reciting one piece every week for 5 years, just think of that interior treasure that they're building up for themselves, all right? Now they don't, like Gettysburg Address, that probably took a month. So they're not going to do 50 pieces over the course of, the year, because the longer pieces are going to take a few weeks. But take the reading we were just working on with the Jamestown flood. That wouldn't have to be the week's recitation. Because usually, you get through 2 or 3 of these readings in a week. But it could be. Because, this will take us a couple of days to do what we're doing with this one reading. You don't do this all in one day. This takes a couple of days. It could even take a whole week. But just think of the interior treasure they're building for themselves. So they could memorize the Jamestown flood story, but they wouldn't have to. You could choose something else. Or you could have the kids each memorize a paragraph of it and then sort of perform it in chorus. Or you could have a group of thespians who might even want to dramatize it. Anything to just bring the story to life and to get those thoughts into the kid's head. Why do it? You can't recite something without really internalizing those words and ideas. You have to really think about them to get it in your memory. We've got sort of 3 objectives. So first of all, recitation helps our kids speak articulately in conversation and in public. If they're getting up in front of their classmates every week and speaking, they're going to get better at it. And the ratio studiorum, if you go back to that first talk, it claims nothing so develops resourcefulness of talent as individual frequent practice in speaking. So the ratio was huge on having kids getting up and speak. So second objective in memorization and recitation is that memory, it's a faculty of the soul. Remember how we talked about the 3 faculties of the soul that education is supposed to form? Well, exercising it, scientists tell us, exercising the memory strengthens the brain and keeps it healthy. It puts building blocks in the brain that are a foundation for advanced knowledge and analytic ability. They tell people who are sort of worried about Alzheimer's, they say, work the brain. There's nothing better you can do than memorize things. So, and then finally, memorization of other people's beautiful and true writings, it puts the true and the beautiful deep into your being, far more effectively than simply just reading it. Because let's face it, when you read, it goes in through your eyeballs and out through your ears or something, right? I mean, it doesn't stay inside you, but when you memorize, it just gets down deep. And you might forget the words after a month if you don't go back and review it, but it's still subconsciously sort of there. Those ideas have kind of become a part of you. So after recitation, so we decide whether or not we're going to recite this thing. Well, then we get into the exercise of imitatio, imitation. So using imitation to teach writing, this has been a classical tool for millennia. So a classical educator, he gives the child something to start from. He gives them a model. We don't want to limit our kids to just what they can come up with sort of on their own. Okay, that's a hard assignment. Just take a blank piece of paper and come up with something completely on your own. That's hard. And we want them to learn how to aim higher, so we put higher things in front of them to imitate. So here's one imitatio exercise that you'll see at the grammar stage. This one is, I borrowed it from the classical writing series. It's called the 6-sentence shuffle. It runs students through 6 ways of imitating a sentence. So if you look at the first sentence here, the one we were playing with before, the 6 things you do with it is, first, you diagram it. Well, we already did that here. Second, you paraphrase it. So paraphrase, all that is this is just imitation at the word level. It's also called synonym substitution. So just maybe look at the original. You've also got it on your sheets if you're too far to see this. And just listen to an example of a paraphrase. A hero is a person who scoffs at the risks involved in carrying out an honorable deed. So you see, it's just the same idea, it's just said a little differently. Now the next step in the 6-sentence shuffle is to expand it. So this is going to be a little longer because we're fleshing it out a little more. If we were to define the word hero, we might call attention to how such a person demonstrates utter contempt in the face of danger while performing, without fear, some marvelous deed. So that's an expansion. The third step in the 6-sentence shuffle is contracting it. A hero ignores danger while performing a noble act. Now the next thing we'll do, and here's where diagramming comes in handy, is we do a grammatical shift, okay? So the subject here is hero, but we're going to kind of switch it around. We're going to move the subject to the very end of the sentence. He who shows contempt of danger in performing a great or noble action is called a hero. So we took an active and moved it to a passive sentence there, okay? Verb. And you can take like an adverbial modifier. In performing some great or noble action, a hero shows contempt of danger. So do you see, we're just sort of messing with it grammatically. And then the sixth is using the same sentence structure but putting in different content. So watch how this works. An iPad is a device that offers opportunities for entertainment during times of boring or weary waiting. So it's sort of the same grammatical structure, but it's different content. So the kids are being sort of pushed beyond their sort of, subject, verb, sentence structure. They're being pushed beyond that to experiment with some other sentence structures that they otherwise wouldn't ever have a clue to even try. Now you do this with, I don't know how many sentences in a week you're going to have them do this with. I mean, you don't want to kill them or anything, but as many as they can handle, and they're going to get better at their writing. So this is just a basic example of imitatio. Now, it's also an example of copia, which is the classical idea of abundance, copiousness, where you express the same idea in many different ways. Classical writers, they had a hoot with this sort of an exercise. Erasmus in the 16th century showed 150 different ways to say, "Your letter has pleased me greatly." This is a classic copia example. And I just put, like a dozen of them down here. "Your letter mightily pleased me. I was intensely exhilarated by your epistle. We derived great delight from your excellency's letter. Your brief letter flooded me with inexpressible joy." And I want you to notice he's doing sort of the expansion, the contraction, the grammatical shuffle. That's exactly what Erasmus is doing here back in the 16th century. "Your letter caused me to rejoice to the full. Heavens, what cause for joy did your letter provide? I rejoiced greatly at your letter." So this is this classic copia exercise of Erasmus. Or take Cyrano de Bergerac. I don't know if you're familiar with this play. It's sort of modernized by Steve Martin in the movie Roxanne. So a man insults Cyrano for his unusually long nose. He has a very long nose. Do you know this story? Yeah, okay, yeah, you do. And, this man, he's sort of a buffoon, and he said, "Sir, your nose is, it's very big." Now, Cyrano responds with what is probably the world's classic copia exercise. He showers this buffoon with dozens of more intelligent ways to insult a man with a big nose. It's absolutely hilarious. And actually, when I was preparing these talks, I pasted part of it in to read to you, but then I realized I don't have time. But you should go home and Google this because it's really very funny. Anyway, but it's a classic copia exercise. And the point Cyrano is trying to make is your command of language, sir, is so pathetic that no one's ever going to listen to what you're saying because you're not expressing anything. So with these imitation exercises, the kids, they gain great dexterity and versatility in writing. And developmental psychology tells us what parents already know. Young children are natural imitators. It's what they're going to do anyway. So let's give them something worth imitating. Classical educators for millennia have scoured the world to find the best models for imitation. So let's give them literature filled with things worth thinking about: courage, generosity, heroism, patriotism, holiness. And we choose readings that have challenged generations of students with something to aspire to. So let's give them something worth imitating. All right, so now that we've played around a little more with writing at the sentence level, we're going to try writing some longer pieces here. So for the example of the Jamestown flood, the student might write a paraphrase of the entire text, maybe a sentence summary of each paragraph. He might transpose it to a poem. This was actually one of Erasmus's favorite copia exercises, was taking a piece of prose and transposing it to poetry, and then the other way around. He might write an original narrative on a similar topic, such as an act of heroism that he personally experienced. And perhaps he would use, this is something I often will assign, is use the vocabulary that we learned from this lesson, like contempt, and whatever other words we picked for vocabulary analysis, and tell your own story about heroism using those words. When they have to use words that are a little more challenging and outside their comfort zone, the whole level of their writing increases. It's a beautiful thing to see. And don't forget that in all these exercises, the students are taking that story of Daniel Peyton to heart, and they're really grappling with it. All the extended attention to this thing, it gives them, with so many tools, it just sears this story into their minds. This story of this courageous man. We've held him up for imitation, and the students aren't going to forget him. So all this work with one little reading, and we obviously don't do this for every single reading, but imagine just applying these tools repeatedly throughout the elementary school years. All this practice, it just leads kids way beyond their limitations. And the cool thing is you could run these exercises, these pre-rhetoric exercises, with really any subject matter that involves a text. You could do this with Euclid's geometry. You could do this with Feynman on physics. You could do the same set of exercises. So remember what Father Martin said, that classical education is about the tools, and you can apply them to anything.